We've talked countless times on this show about the affordability crisis in the United States, which makes today's guest of particular interest. Today we welcome Moira Concannon, who is an affordable owner and operator. She's the co-founder of Elizabeth Property Group. Moira, welcome to The Build Up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. We're happy to have you here today and talk to you about your very diverse background in real estate. You've been at Drake, which is a private equity fund, and you've also been at CIM Group. But we're just really interested, what is it about affordable housing that really made you want to make that pivot?
Yeah, so after being in the real estate private equity space for a number of years, mostly as a generalist, I think as I was thinking about what I could do next and getting ready to go out on my own, honestly, I didn't start with affordable housing. I sort of started with a top-down approach, just as I thought about what I wanted the next half of my career to look like. And so I dug into a couple of different sectors, and I think the more I learned about affordable housing, I was looking for something that, frankly, just had barriers to entry. Not that any real estate is easy, but in affordable housing in particular, there's a lot of barriers to entry. It's incredibly difficult to get deals done. It's not for the faint of heart. And as I sort of understood, how the deals worked, the economics, the barriers to entry, I decided that it was sort of a path I wanted to go down. And then, of course, there's the added benefit of, you're getting to deliver something that people really need. I mean, it's infrastructure, basically. And so it felt like a win-win, something you could really dig your teeth into, be challenging, ultimately have a career and make money, but then also feel good about what you're doing at the end of the day, trying to get, work with cities to most efficiently allocate their resources and improve affordable housing.
That makes a lot of sense. And we agree completely. Like, we really need affordable housing in this country. And so it's great that you've kind of dove into this specific sector. So what do you do differently with Elizabeth Property Group? Like, what is your investment philosophy? How are you trying to differentiate yourselves within the affordable housing space?
Sure. So right now we're focused in Texas, which is where my business partner Tisha is based. She's in Dallas, and the rest of our team is also based. And the reason that we started in Texas, aside from her being local there, is a couple reasons. I mean, obviously, Texas is a big state. There's a lot of economic growth. But cities like New York and LA, they've had the housing crisis for decades. I mean, for hundreds of years, probably.
Yeah.
Places like Texas have been naturally affordable for a long time. But I think a combination of the growth that they've seen there, the in-migration, the rent increases, that happened from 2020 to 2020, that's really still ongoing, maybe flattening out now. I think those things combined, as well as really just the institutionalization of apartments in general. I mean, you've had so many private equity firms come in, even into tertiary markets in Texas.
Yep.
It's very rare to see mom and pop owned apartment buildings anymore. Mm-hmm. So all of those factors combined have created an affordability crisis in Texas that I think is relatively new. And so it just seemed like the right state to start in. And I'd say how we think about things differently, a couple of ways. So affordable housing historically, and when I say affordable housing, I'm talking about capital A affordable, which is usually, not always, but usually deals that are financed with low-income housing tax credits and or have some sort of public subsidy program in place. So historically, deals that are capital A affordable housing, there's a lot of public subsidy, either in the form of tax credits or federal funding or city funding or housing authorities, putting project-based rent, contracts in place and guaranteeing the rents. This can mean that a lot of times it costs a lot of money to build new affordable housing. And that's when you end up with headlines that say, this project in San Francisco costs over $1 million a unit to build affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Our approach is always like, how can we really most efficiently allocate resources to either preserve existing affordable deals or take apartment properties that may not be capital A affordable today, but they're at risk of becoming unaffordable because of where they sit. Maybe they're in a really great location that's near, retail and transportation and decent schools and things that everybody wants to be near. And it's at risk of not becoming affordable and basically, going to the local jurisdiction and working on a deal with them, but really focus at the end of the day on what is our total development cost, mm-hmm. keeping that competitive and low. So if you can basically regulate and put affordability on a property for the long term, like 40 plus years, mm-hmm. put services on the property, put better infrastructure in place, new roofs, new elevators, all the things that a property needs to be working for the next 40 years. And you can do that for $250,000 a unit or less. That's something that we're looking for.
That's sustainable.
Yeah. And you mentioned the tax credits, and we saw that your company just acquired about 6 properties, right, with those tax credits. So what does that mean for your, what is the investment strategy there?
Yeah, so those are 6 properties that they had been developed, I think, originally in 1996 with tax credits, redeveloped again with credits in 2012. We actually bought them with an equity partner that it's like a separate account with a bank that has a CRA need. And the business plan for those is, I think what happens a lot of times to these properties with credits is you get all this funding in place and then you operate it and kind of the operations fall apart because people make their money a lot of times in this business on the front end with developer fee, like structuring fees. And then over the course of time, they're just not really managing things the way they should be. So we saw a management opportunity to turn things around. That means improving occupancy. It means working with the housing authorities to, in some cases, increase rents, but usually at the cost of the housing authority, cutting expenses where possible. We've brought in some social programming. We closed those deals also with a nonprofit partner, which gave us some property tax exemption benefits. So basically just trying to operate the properties better. And it's, our investor has a sort of a double bottom line approach. They need to make money, but they also want to feel like they're doing the right thing, by investing their money. And so that's sort of the nature of that investment. And our long-term plan with that is when we go to sell is not necessarily just to sell to a third party, but it's Tish and I's goal with most of our portfolio that we own it for the long term. So hopefully, the next iteration, whenever it makes sense capital markets wise, we'll put new credits on it and then make the infrastructure investments that a property needs to sustain itself. Because otherwise, since the rents are low, the property economics just may not support otherwise spending that money that's really needed to.
That makes sense.
So you talked about the barriers to entry with affordable housing. Of course, with real estate investing in general, it's, there's many barriers to entry, but what are specific to affordable housing? What makes affordable housing so difficult to get into?
I think a couple of things. I mean, first of all, capital A affordable housing, you're almost by definition working with local governments. And of course, like cities and housing authorities, they don't want to, take a risk on, sort of a fly-by-night operation or someone who's brand new to the industry. So it can be just difficult to just get started. I mean, even if you've had a great career in even market rate housing, I think there can be challenges. We were fortunate in our first transaction that we did. Our partner was actually the city of Dallas. So my partner Tisha is born and raised in Dallas and had, solid relationships with some of the people there. And I think that allowed us to get the benefit of the doubt. It was still difficult to convince like a board of people to sort of trust us with this transaction. But I think a combination of, sort of starting in an area that you're familiar with or that you may have connections in. And then also just honestly bringing a really good transaction to bear. I think if you're just like, hey, there's this random piece of land and it's in an area that's not so great and you guys should give me all this money and the numbers don't make sense. I mean, that's easy to say no to, but the way if you don't have the experiences, I think to just bring a really compelling opportunity that is hard for people to say no to. So we had those two things going for us, but yeah, it's just difficult to get these agencies to take a risk on a newcomer.
Yeah, of course. Anytime you're working with the city or the government, it's always like so much harder.
And we relate to, just the same way we approach our business. It's really hard to convince people to trust you, right? Especially with such a big transaction. But as you continue to grow your firm, right, what sort of trends do you see that's really shaping the affordability market and housing in the future?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I think these news stories of it costing $1 million a unit to build affordable housing, I mean, I hope that that's getting better. And I think that it is because cities are getting more creative and you have really sophisticated cities, obviously like New York, who have really smart people working there that I think are, attacking these problems and they're at the forefront. I mean, other challenges we face, and this is not just affordable, but like you mentioned earlier, insurance costs. I mean, in Texas, insurance costs are wild. I mean, some deals negative cash flow now. I mean, they're not even worth anything.
Because of insurance?
Because of insurance.
That's one of the 3 states that has like the severe weather that we know have been hit the hardest. We were just talking about is California, Texas, and Florida, obviously. So, wow, I can't believe that the insurance alone is making them not pencil.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are challenges we face, but like looking forward, I think a couple of things. I mean, affordable housing is a good industry in the sense that the demand is almost unlimited. I mean, and only growing. I think, cities and different agencies have also gotten smarter as it relates to serving the whole person. So, real focus on incorporating services into housing. And so that's something that we've been able to do a little bit. We're by no means the experts on it, but we've been able to do it a little bit at some of our properties. Like, for example, we have a property in Austin where The county, Travis County, one of their affiliates is our partner in the deal. And so in exchange for certain tax benefits, the property basically pays for a full-time social worker to be staffed at the property. And affordable housing is sort of an industry of piggybacking. Like once you get the support of one group or you get one source of funding, it then becomes easier to get buy-in from other groups. So then they were sort of able to leverage the fact that the property, had this dedicated full-time social worker because people who suffer from housing instability, they have needs other than like getting the apartment is great, but that's just a real small part of the problem a lot of times. So they were able to leverage the presence of that, staff person to then go seek additional federal funding for their agency. And then staff I think we have now 4, or we're going to have once the property's still in construction, in rehab, but we'll 4 full-time social workers whose job is to just service the residents that live there and help them.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. We work with Brown Harris Stevens and many other top real estate firms, staging their homes to sell quickly and at the highest price possible. Our staging is affordable without sacrificing quality or design. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Is that the first time that something like that has been done, or is that like a common practice with affordable housing to like have social workers as part of the program?
It's becoming more common. We're certainly not the first people to do it. I would, and again, I'm not the expert in what the industry would call permanent supportive housing. But basically, that's housing that is very heavily subsidized, even more so than your typical tax credit property, which, receives the tax credit subsidy, but otherwise it's, serves people who have an income and they pay rent. It functions more like a regular multifamily property. But permanent supportive housing is really more deeply subsidized and really meant to cater to the whole person. So I'd say what we're doing is sort of a quasi kind of an in-between. But going back to, what our company's goals are, that's sort of what we're all about in terms of how can we most efficiently allocate resources. Like, of course, in a perfect world, you'd have, 24/7, care and you'd have everything, but that would cost a lot of money. And so it's sort of like, how can we leverage and piggyback and keep costs low, but still provide something that's needed.
And it's really great, though, just in Texas, it seems that the government is really working with you versus here in New York, where it's really, really hard to make affordable housing work, right? So it's good that you're able to, have these benefits, but also get that tax credit, right? So it's more easy to make it work because here we've been talking to a lot of developers and it's just not penciling because of the legislature. So that's great. So are you looking at anything in New York in particular, or are you just focused on Texas right now?
At this time, we're focused mostly in Texas. I would call New York really the big leagues for affordable housing. Not to say that we wouldn't look here eventually, but honestly, Texas is a big state and we're a small team and our company's 4 years old. Something that we are active in outside of Texas is acquiring other developers' GP interest in their LIHTC partnership deals. So by nature of the credits, you basically have to be in the partnership for 15 years, and there's a lot of operational and administrative burden that comes with being the GP. And, sometimes people may do a deal and like 5 years later, they've broken up with their partner, or they're just tired of managing it. They're in a different industry, or somebody dies and things happen. But these deals, there's a lot of regulation and you can't just like kind of let it go to the wayside. Like you have to keep up with it.
Yeah.
So we're actively looking at opportunities to fill in for other developers in those situations. And that's something that we're exploring basically kind of East Coast and Southeast in addition to Texas.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's a very creative way to kind of like break into new markets and not even have to take on like the full acquisition and getting it all like infrastructure set up. That's really interesting. Going back to what you said about like policy and working with the local legislation. So you said, some of these cities are becoming more creative, which is great to hear. But what do you feel really is the needed policy changes, to really help stimulate more affordable housing? Like, is there something you could pinpoint this to?
Well, so there's two different types of tax credit transactions. There's 9% tax credit deals, which the industry calls competitive credits. And that means it's allocated, certain amount is allocated to each state, and they're always way more demand than there is availability. And then there's 4% credits, which are typically not competitive. However, those 4% deals by statute have to be financed with at least 50% tax exempt bonds. And what that means is they effectively do become competitive because there's only a limited supply of tax-exempt bonds. So something that seems to be sort of debated in Congress every year is reducing that 50% amount to a lower amount. That's something that would certainly, by definition, I mean, if it went from 50 to 25, that would double the amount of 4% credit deals that can pencil. Unfortunately, a lot of states, that alone is not enough just because of where interest, a couple years ago, you would have been able to probably just with a 4% credit deal. And if you got like a really, sub 3% rate on your HUD loan, 40-year AM, you could maybe make the pencils work depending on your rents. But, that's very difficult to do now. But I would say definitely lowering the 50% floor would be big for the industry. So I would say that, and then also just different agencies working together. I mean, I don't know exactly how to effectuate that, but even in the state, you have a city with a policy and a state with a different policy, or they both have different buckets of money, and sometimes groups are more competitive than working together.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because people are also in elected positions, and so there's turnover at those levels. And I think affordable housing in general needs to be a little bit more top down, like let's set the goals and go from there. But instead it's always point in time decision making. Like someone brings a deal to a city and they're like, here's this affordable housing deal, take it or leave it. I need, $5 million. And then it's like, okay, well, I want to do affordable housing. Is this the best option though? If I had all my options, would I do this one? But, there's sunset limits on funding, and people are politically, nominated or taken on and off boards every year. And so it's hard to have like a consistent
That's where the relationships
policy
come in, right? Like with like you mentioned, your partner had those relationships with the cities. It sounds like that's been helpful for all those reasons you said.
Yeah. And, everything you've said so far, it just really shows that, it's very complex, right? Affordable housing, this part of the segment of real estate is just very complex and it's very nuanced. So what advice would you give to someone who is looking to get into this sphere?
Yeah.
Don't.
No, I mean, I feel like a lot of like old timers like, oh, don't. But no, but I think you should.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of ways to get into it. I mean, I guess it sort of depends on your background and experience how to first approach it. But I would say, a lot of times people don't think of working for public agencies or cities when they're thinking about real estate because people are like, oh, that's slow paced or that's boring, or there's a perception that maybe the pay isn't good or something. Mm-hmm. But honestly, for affordable housing, I mean, if you go spend a few years and really learn and work hard and have a good reputation and like really get the lay of the land and meet people, I don't think there's a better place you could learn from. I came in it from a different way, so that hasn't been my story. But honestly, there's times when I wish I did have that background. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of tax I feel like when people talk about tax credits, it's very opaque, but it's a huge industry, and there's tons of syndicators and other groups you can work for, again, just to go get the lay of the land, see how deals work, understand how to underwrite deals. Mm-hmm. I think it can be hard to just decide out of the blue, like I'm going to go put together an affordable housing transaction. So it just depends what, angle from the industry you're coming in or what type of experience you have. But there's a lot of ways to get involved.
And from that approach, you can learn how the cities are thinking when these deals are presented to them. So then when you're on the other side, you can then, be better prepared and hopefully more successful in getting your deal funded. So that's really great advice. I'm sure that, even though it's a relatively new company, you and your partner have had your fair share of challenges already. And so we always find that we learn the most from, our own challenges as well as others. So is there a particular challenge that you and your partner went through that was like a really big lesson learned so far?
We're learning lessons every day, usually the hard way. I would say that, the biggest lesson learned is, you just have to do what you say you're going to do, which sounds really easy, but sometimes it's not when you have a lot of difficult decisions to make. And the other lesson that we've had to learn the hard way is, we've done some transactions where we just took so much risk on the front end. Like neither of us are necessarily independently wealthy. All of our pursuit capital is our own. And the way it works is you kind of start right with a deal deposit, and then you start spending third-party money, and then you start paying HUD application fees. And by the time you turn around, you might have like $1 million invested into a transaction, and you have no ability to determine the outcome. I mean, it's all in the hands of different agencies. Yeah. And there's also, in Texas at least, there's a very strict timeline on doing a bond. I mentioned the tax-exempt bonds earlier. Mm-hmm. And doing a tax-exempt bond deal, you have to close it within 180 days of getting that allocation, or everything just ends and it all goes away. So we've kind of put ourselves in some situations where like our back was totally against the wall and things were not totally in our control. And I think we got lucky in those situations, but it resulted in sleepless nights. And as we think about scaling our business, we're trying to do less of that and more, focused on, you can't control outcomes, but focused on things that we can at least influence more.
No, that sounds very stressful, both from the financial side and also feeling like some of these key decisions are completely outside of your control. Like you could have done everything right and still be in these tough spots. So that's stressful and that's not easy. So what ends up keeping you motivated to want to keep going forward and keep pursuing this specific sector?
I mean, a lot of things. It's been so fun and rewarding to build our own company. It's exciting every day to wake up and see what's going to happen. I feel like my identity and my name is tied to everything I'm doing. So I just care a lot about what happens. I think Tish and I want to grow our business and we want people to think that we're, smart and hardworking and that we do what we say we'll do. We want to make money over the long term too.
Yeah.
All of those things are what get us out of bed in the morning. I mean, at the end of the day too, right? Like it's housing for people and we want to like satisfy all of our partners. We want our residents to be happy about where they live. The operational piece is really, really challenging, but
but you are making an impact. And I think that's really admirable because, again, we do have this shortage of housing in the country and affordable housing at least. So we do think that, your passion is really resonating. So we feel the same way too. I mean, two women owners. And for us, we have the same sort of mission and goals too. So we really admire you two.
Yeah, there's definitely different when you're doing it for yourself versus other people. And you came from a very corporate kind of background. So how was that transition for you when you went, from working for these big institutions or relatively big and corporate and all that to then being like, okay, it's me and my partner, against the world?
It's funny when you're working at a different company, you think you have a vision, right, of how it will be working for yourself. You're like, oh, the flexibility is going to be amazing. And I'm going to work from home and I'm going to like do a noon workout class.
Yeah. Okay.
It's so much less flexible. Yeah. And the thing I miss about working at companies is sort of having someone over my shoulder. Sometimes when we make a decision, I look at Tisha and I'm like, I think this is right. I think I read the document correctly, but like, I don't have an investment committee here of like, people with more experience than I do, approving it. So like that gives you a sense of comfort when you work at a company that you're not taking crazy risks or if they, it's their money at the end of the day. If they approved it, it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
Whereas when you work for yourself, like sometimes I wish I had that sort of like investment committee, honestly.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's the biggest challenge and just that you never really get to turn it off. You really have to go out of your way to put like parameters in place in your personal life so that you don't just turn into a total like work maniac.
Oh, sure.
Well, yeah, there's always like that time and place where it's like in the very beginning you're setting things up. It seems like it's just all work, but it becomes that like an inflection point where it starts to become a little bit more balanced. But of course you have to really love what you're doing and be passionate because you're really living and breathing it every day. We're the same as you, whereas like we worked for a brief time for other people and then ultimately wanted to do our own thing. But of course it made it much harder. There's a lot more financial pressure in the beginning, but ultimately, when you stick with it and you like you said, you're doing all the right things and you're being smart about things, it will eventually pay off, but it just people are impatient, they're not willing to kind of go through that journey. But we'll leave you with one last question, which is just about like what's coming in the future. I mean, you mentioned like some of the new opportunities that you're exploring, but in general, like what is kind of like the bigger vision for EPG?
Yeah, honestly, we're still figuring that out a little bit day by day, but I think eventually we would like to grow our business outside of just Texas. I mentioned that we're looking at those interests, outside of Texas, continue to grow our team. I think we just want to do that in a responsible way. Sometimes people go out and just like want to hire a bunch of people and rent office space and take in a lot of outside money. We've been a little bit more like, I don't really like the term bootstrap, but a little bit more bootstrap,
conservative.
I guess. Yeah, a little more conservative.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're kind of the work product. Like we're putting in the work and I think we just want to grow our business responsibly, honestly. And kind of see where it takes us. It's honestly, it's hard sometimes to think outside of like your to-do list for the day.
I know.
You're running a small business, but Yeah, I see us wanting to be eventually a major player and influencer in affordable.
And we do see that. I mean, just your passion is really, again, just resonating with all that we stand for as well. So we're definitely going to follow you and look forward to what's coming next.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We loved talking with you about this today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. This is fun.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
So that was a really nice conversation with Moira. I feel like, as always, we learned so much, and it's just really great to see, how hard they're working and all that they're building in Texas and beyond. And so really, really exciting stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. It was very inspiring.
Yeah. But I think it's time to talk about something that everyone seems to be talking about, which is AI. It's actually amazing we haven't yet talked about its impact on real estate. But of course, it's transforming every industry, and real estate is no exception. And it's having, I'm sure, in some ways, it's always a give and a take when it comes to AI, the benefits and the cons. But I think today we're really focusing on the benefits and how it's really having a positive impact on sustainability when it comes to architecture, construction, management, all of this. So let's get into that.
AI can really help optimize everything from energy consumption to the materials we use. So it's really a game changer. And as cities are looking to build smarter, I think this is really going to really pioneer in the industry.
For sure. And it's not only about refining what we do now, it's actually allowing us to build even greener buildings. For example, take construction workflows. AI can optimize how materials like steel, glass, concrete are being used in big urban developments, which is minimizing waste and boosting efficiency.
One great example is how building information modeling, or BIM, is using AI to really simulate construction scenarios. Architects can choose really sustainable materials and methods. So overall, we're building a more eco-friendly environment. China is already leveraging to cut down material waste and improve energy use.
And let's not forget about Masdar City in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. So they're using AI tools to really analyze tons of data to cut resource consumption during construction. And the result of that is actually lower emissions and, of course, the smarter use of materials. And actually in Masdar City, one of the main objections to the city was that construction delays were putting a real stress on investor interest. And so now having the ability to have AI come in and really optimize their construction process there can be, and we'll watch and see if it's actually going to have a positive impact, because right now it's kind of in a difficult place due to how the construction has been going so far.
And speaking of cutting edge examples, like the UAE, we see Google's Bay Campus and the Edge in Amsterdam just really are perfect cases. They're both using AI to manage renewable energy and just to ensure that it's being used effectively. These systems are dynamically controlling the lighting, heating, and cooling based on how many people are in the building. It's real-time energy management.
Which is such a huge leap forward. And, you mentioned Google, but also in Seattle, there's the Bullitt Center, and they're using AI-powered sensors to track energy and water use. And so it's actually making it possible for the building to generate more energy than it consumes. So imagine a world where these buildings and real estate in general is giving back more than it's taking. And we've talked about this before, that real estate is actually one of the biggest, contributors to carbon emissions. So now we're seeing AI play a critical role in trying to make real estate much more sustainable across the board, and especially in these urban cities where, that a higher concentration of the emissions are coming from.
No, that's really positive. And again, we talked about AI being both positive and negative. So it's really interesting, and it's really great that we're seeing it firsthand too in real estate. Going back to city, it's not just we're seeing it in individual buildings, we're seeing it, really shaping entire cities. So take smart grids, for example. AI can predict peak energy loads and adjust power distribution.
And in other places like in Hudson Yards in New York, where we are, in Songdo in South Korea, AI systems are managing everything there from energy use and transportation, like you said, and even waste. So these projects show us us really what the future of sustainable cities can and should look like.
And AI's role in urban mobility is incredible. In cities like Masdar, like you mentioned earlier, and Singapore, AI-powered traffic systems are cutting down emission by optimizing traffic flow, which is great, right? Because in cities like this, you see traffic being such a huge impact on the environment. So this is
and
great.
The quality of life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, this is really all very exciting things to think about as we think how AI can help us to reduce waste, to optimize sustainability, and to build entire smart cities that really prioritize the environment, something that's obviously very important right now. It's really exciting to think about all the ways in which real estate can continue to grow and use AI to reshape the future of our cities.
Absolutely. And as AI continues to evolve, we'll see even more innovation. So architects and engineers, stay tuned.
100%. Let's see what happens.
Yes.
All right. So that's everything for today's episode. Thank you as always for listening and joining us. We invite you to subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you then. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice.
For specific recommendations, please consult with your financial, legal, or tax professional.
Or always leaves your text on red. Leaves your text on red.
Built the corporate group with $1,000 loan.
Tell us a little bit about how you actually came from.
Welcome to the build-up genre.
Thanks for having me.
We're coming to you here from Studio 1873.
It's not 57% over 2.7 million.
So then, it's just